Welcome to Secret Sound. I'm your host, Matt Marble. Join me as we explore the hidden history of American music. With each episode, I'll be highlighting fascinating yet marginalized composers from the fringes of American memory, as well as new perspectives on a few well-known artists. We'll also be exploring some of the esoteric traditions that influence these artists, like theosophy, astrology, Enochian magic, and more. Welcome to Episode 3, Music from Summerland. Here, our focus is on the renowned Dean of African American Composers, William Grant Still. One of the more well-known composers in this history, Still's spiritual biography has largely remained hidden, as well as some of his more compelling works. Through Still's life, we explore the esoteric spiritual traditions of African Americans in the early 20th century. Still's music drew not only from African American folk music, but spirit communications, dream visions, meditation, and more. Now let us close our eyes and enter Summerland. Through the visionary writings of Emanuel Swedenborg, the Poughkeepsie seer Andrew Jackson Davis wrote reverentially about what he called the Summerland. He writes, "When this world is unfolded into an all-embracing state of civilization, it will represent the highest source of joy in the Summerland. Extremes and ultimates meet in the sphere to which we go at death. Here they meet only on the surface, there from the interior. The Negro will never fully understand the Caucasian in this world, because the Caucasian will never fully understand the Negro. The two opposite races meet in the Summerland, where the rivers of the heavenly spaces are musical to the ear that can hear them flowing between the constellations." Madame Blavatsky's theosophy also referred to Summerland, viewing it as an intermediary region in the astral plane, a place where planetary angels dwell before possibly moving on to the higher spiritual geographies of Devachan and finally Nirvana. Looking to the African American experience, especially through spirituals, the Christian heaven is presented as the just reward to those who suffer yet live their lives by a divine compass. Mystic theologian Howard Thurman wrote about it this way: "The otherworldly hope looms large, and this is not strange. The otherworldly hope is always available when groups of people find themselves completely frustrated in the present, and their belief in God leads quite definitely to a position which fixes their hope upon their deliverance beyond the grave." Centuries of slavery, oppression, and injustice weigh upon the identity of African Americans, and as in many historical periods of marginalization, esoteric traditions tend to help heal, affirm, and empower the oppressed. For many, the ability to imagine or visualize a heavenly kingdom offered an empowering autonomy, limitless imagination, and an escape from the racism encountered in the New World. And in the realm of music, we find several composers attempting to sonify what Davis called those heavenly sounds flowing between the constellations. And we find music that aims to heal and unify society with an imaginative ear hearkening a better future. Throughout his life, angels and spirits guided composer William Grant Still to such a heavenly audition. William Grant Still was born in Woodville, Mississippi, to musically inclined parents, though his father was tragically murdered when he was 3 months old. Moving to Little Rock, Arkansas, Still was raised by his mother, stepfather, and his grandmother, as well as the old-time religion of local churches. Still went off to college at Wilberforce University in Ohio. Then he married and had 4 kids. Pursuing music, he found a great gig in Memphis, providing arrangements for W.C. Handy, the father of the blues. This was followed by stints of study at Oberlin College, as well as naval service during World War I. And it was in 1919 that Still moved to New York City's Harlem borough. There he studied composition with George Whitfield Chadwick and avant-garde composer Edgard Varese. Inspired by Varese, Still's earliest compositions were experimental or ultra-modern, utilizing non-traditional harmonies. But by 1925, Still came to disparage ultramodernism as being too intellectual. This is when his music began rooting itself in the African American experience, entering what he would call his Negroid period. Still had always viewed composition from a religious perspective. He once wrote, "Composing needs what I may call inspiration. Not the mood of the moment, but the permanent breath of life, emanating from the life source itself. No amount of technique can make up for this God-given sense of life. Somewhere in his nature, the real composer must have a spiritual quality which enables him to come close to God." During the 1930s, Still began visiting various African American churches, never identifying with a single one, and he began composing spirituals, such as his 3 rhythmic spirituals of 1930, which we've been listening to. Also in 1930, Still composed his first symphony. Still's Afro-American Symphony tapped into the heart of gospel, blues, and jazz through epic orchestration. This is by far his most famous work. And Still's musical efforts were at once efforts of social justice, and what he achieved opened the doors for many to follow. He was the first African American to have a symphony and an opera performed professionally, as well as the first to conduct a professional orchestra. But as time passed, even he was frustrated with the reduction of his work to what he called his early Negroid period. Exploring the music and religion of other cultures, his perspective broadened. He continued searching spiritually, while music was becoming his religion, and Harlem was rich with spiritual offerings.
But a new kind of sensation to rhythmic, racy Harlem is a religious phenomenon called Father Divine, whose presence pervades all Harlem.
Let us get away from those places in consciousness where men are merely surmising heaven to be something mythological and something imaginary, but bring our mythological concepts into actuality and put them into practice as a living reality.
Still was intrigued by African American New Thought preachers like Father Divine and George Wilson Beckton. He was friends with Beckton, and Beckton's wife was also a psychic, giving psychic readings to Still. Still prayed regularly, notably drawn to the Bible's 91st Psalm, and throughout his life, he experienced symbolic dreams and waking visions, like this one. "I beheld a host of angels. They approached me like a mighty cloud and sang a song of overwhelming beauty, one that I have been unable to remember. As the angels sang, I broke into tears and awoke to find myself sobbing with joy. God spoke to me." Still often heard music in his dreams and notated them whenever he could. Dream books were popular in Harlem at the time, some using numerology, which was also used for gambling, and others offering more thematic interpretations of our nightly dreams. He also consulted local preachers in Harlem, who readily offered dream interpretation to the congregants. In fact, one of Still's earliest compositions from 1924 in the ultra-modern style is called From the Land of Dreams, in which Still tried to depict the experiences of dreaming. Meanwhile, African empowerment and esoteric perspectives were being more and more celebrated in Harlem.
When I am dead, wrap the mantle of the red, the black, and the green around me, for in the new life I shall rise up with God's grace and blessing to lead the millions up the heights and the triumph that you well know. Look for me in a whirlwind or a storm. Look for me all around you. For with God's grace, I shall come back with countless millions of black men and women who have died in America, those who have died in the West Indies, and those who have died in Africa to aid you in the fight for liberty, freedom, and life.
Harlem was the home to Ethiopian Jews, Noble Drew Ali's Moorish Science Temple, and Robert T. Brown's Hermetic Society for World Service. Meanwhile, fusing Native American natural medicine, biblical psalms, occult magic, as well as Catholic and voodoo rituals, down south the folk magic of hoodoo was becoming widespread. Still began looking into his own African heritage and finding a particular fascination with voodoo, which reappears in his work often. In 1933, he composed the orchestral work Africa, playing now. Having never been to the nation, Still claimed this work presented not the Africa of reality, but an Africa mirrored in fancy and radiantly ideal. In 1934, Still left his wife and moved to California. First to Ojai, a home base for theosophy. Still recalls from this period, "After our separation, I came across a book on occultism. Reading it gave me unexpected interest in the subject, an interest which has not lessened since then. It was natural that this study should make me attach new significance to my dreams, which now began to change their character in a striking fashion." Still also began exploring Rosicrucianism, the Baha'i faith, and theosophy with more interest. He often engaged family members in numerological exercises and began meditating as well as praying. His 1939 composition suite, 7 Traceries, features a work called Out of Silence, playing now, which is a reference to Still's meditation practice. Reflecting on meditation, he writes, "I felt a very marked change within. My heart could scarcely contain the joy brought to me from the cosmic. All is well, and I know God is. I must do His will." During his first years in California, Still began exploring psychics and mediums the way he'd explored churches in Harlem. His preferred medium was Marjorie Lang, an ex-runner-up to Miss America in 1926, and wife of composer Arthur Lang. Through Lang, Still and friends communicated with a group of spirits that called themselves the Whatchamacallums, or the WWs, as Still abbreviated. The WWs espoused theosophical aims of universal brotherhood, and they told Still, quote, that if he could express his religious concepts in musical form, he would be able to awaken uncountable people to the spiritual power that music has. Still's visions continued. His wife, pianist Verna Arvey, described other visions that Still had. He saw an owl who talked to him, and once, lying on a bed, half asleep, he saw a faceless being clothed in white entering the room. The being told him to get up, and when he did, he looked back and saw himself lying in bed. The being then showed him wonderful symbols: lush green foliage, crystal clear water, and he explained the meaning of each symbol. In 1934, Still composed the opera Blue Steel, about a Bayou witch doctor involving hoodoo rituals. Amidst numerous other compositions, opera would become a focus for Still for the rest of his life. And his operas almost always had some esoteric spiritual theme. In 1939, Still collaborated with Harlem Renaissance poet Langston Hughes on the opera Troubled Island. which focused on the 18th century Haitian Revolution and voodoo religion. Here you can hear Still speaking on the struggle of having it performed.
I have waited 37 years for this.
37 years?
Yes. It has looked, so dark at times, impossible. But I, I believed that the time would come when a production would be possible.
In 1941, Still composed A Bayou Legend with his wife Verna Arvey as librettist. This opera was based on a Mississippi legend concerning a man who fell in love with a spirit. And in 1981, predating Robert Ashley's Perfect Lives, this work became the first TV opera put on by Opera South in Jackson, Mississippi. Then there was Mota from 1951, about a witch doctor named Monés. Then The Pillar from 1956, focused on Native American spirit communication. And Minette Fontaine from 1958, featuring voodoo queen Mary Portier. Tragically, few of Still's operas have been performed, even to this day, and still so many other compositions are ignored in favor of his earlier works. Pieces like Archaic Ritual, Incantation and Dance, and Enanga. You're listening to the second movement of Enanga, composed in 1958 for harp and strings. Still's daughter, Judith Still, recalled that, from the Bible he discovered that the ancient prophets carried harps which they played while the Spirit of God visited them with prophecy. Further, the harp was a means to mystical healing, while Enanga is the Ugandan word for harp. Now let us return to Still's three visions from 1936. The one featuring Summerland, which we heard played on the piano earlier. His daughter Judith described the piece as follows. The three segments of the suite, Dark Horseman, Summerland, and Radiant Pinnacle, tell the story of the human soul after death. The body expires, and the soul goes on to an apocalyptic judgment. If it is seen that the past life has been a good one, the soul may enter heaven or Summerland. After a period of time, the soul may reincarnate to learn additional earthly lessons on the human plane. Some souls reincarnate many times in a constant circular progress towards godly perfection, or the radiant pinnacle. Still continued finding music in his dreams. In 1961, he composed The Peaceful Land, based on a dream he'd had, which seemed to depict the Summerland. One morning I awoke, he recalls, after having had a most uplifting dream. In my dream, I was in a beautiful land with some friends of mine. It was a land of peace, of freedom, and of exalted beings. I immediately started to write a composition descriptive of my dream. But he found it increasingly harder to stage his works, while becoming less satisfied with his compositions. By the 1950s, Still's largely tonal and folk-oriented music was upstaged by modernist experimentation and German serialism. Still was also an outspoken anti-communist during the Red Scare.
If a person consistently reads and advocates the views expressed in a communist publication, he may be a communist.
And Still's politics had many liberals and African Americans turning their ears away from his work. In one of his late operas, The Pillar, A divine figure seems to be speaking to Still himself. The ways of the Great Spirit are hard for men to understand. You suffer so that others may learn, but your brief suffering brings a reward. After 3 years of hospital care, Still passed away on December 3rd, 1978. His daughter Judith and her children now operate her father's estate. And in speaking with Judith, she once told me that she'd communicated with her father's spirit. She claimed he had been reincarnated and is now seeking political office to reconcile past injustices. Let me leave you with Still's voice. Music shouldn't only appeal to the vanity of the person who writes it. It should serve others as religion serves mankind, by helping people to live better lives and by giving them, even if only for an instant, a glimpse of real inspiration. And if we want music to appeal more, we must address our message to the heart as well as to the intellect. In trying to understand the needs of others, a whole new world will open up to us. I'm Matt Marble, and you've been listening to Secret Sound.